So my name is Julia Korkman. I'm very happy to be chairing this session, and I'm even happier to present our two presentators, but I can tell you already now that we have decided that this won't be two separate lectures, but instead we will have more like an interview or discussion. So Olivia and Taina have brought some pictures that they would like to show you. We're trying to keep you awake now that it's after lunch and difficult to stay tuned. So I'm very happy to present for you Olivia Lind Haldorsson, who is a firm children's rights advocate since, more than 20 years, and head of the Children at Risk Unit at the Council of Baltic Sea States Secretariat, the CBSS, which coordinates the PROMISE project, which you will hear more about also today. And my esteemed colleague, Dr. Taina Laajasalo, who is at the moment the coordinator of the Finnish Barnahus system here with the National Institute of Health and Welfare, who also for a long time has worked at the University Hospital with child abuse investigations, and who is also a very merited researcher in the field. So when we start, I would like you, Olivia, to, for those who are not entirely familiar with the Barnahus system, to try to give a very brief description of it, if that's possible.
It's not possible, but I will do it anyway. Can I just very quickly have a raise of hands? Who knows about Barnahus here? Because if you all do, then I will be even briefer. Almost everyone does. Well, you see here a model of the Barnahus. And Barnahus is Icelandic for a house for children. And it is recognized as a leading child-friendly multidisciplinary model which gathers all relevant services under one roof to provide a coordinated and effective and child-friendly response in parallel child protection and criminal investigations. And it can be described as a house with 4 rooms. And as you see here on the picture, the 4 rooms contain child protection, criminal investigation, physical health, and mental health. And the role of the Barnahus is to coordinate this response. I think I'll just leave it at that.
Fantastic. So, Taina, would you like to tell us where Finland is at this point in relation to the Barnahus system?
I sure will. So if we think back to history, there have been many people who have been inspired by the Barnahus work here in Finland over the years. Many actually work within this institute, and some are here today. And many have worked outside, for example, in university central hospitals. And this picture sort of describes where we are now, at least in some level. You can see the 5 university central hospital districts on the map, and we have 1 unit in each of those districts that serves children who are involved in child abuse investigation, and the investigation has been started by the police. And I would say that these are as close as we get to Barnahus here in Finland. The units fulfill actually quite many of the Barnahus quality standards. I think they are familiar for many of you. There works a multi-professional staff consisting of social workers, psychologists, child psychiatrists, in some cases also gynecologists or pediatricians. They collaborate very closely with the police and child protective services. And the premises are child-friendly, and the child comes there to give his or her account to be interviewed there. But unfortunately, these units do not serve all the children who are involved in abuse investigations. They actually only serve a minority, the most vulnerable child victims, I would say, very young children or children with different kind of developmental or mental health difficulties. Or children involved in custody disputes. So this is what we have. It's Barnahus type system. I wouldn't call it yet a Barnahus system, but it resembles it in many ways.
Okay.
And actually, I must pause here because I wanted to ask you something. It's not a coincidence that you are chairing this session. You have been involved in developing these units since the beginning. So I'm sorry if this comes as a surprise, but I would also like to ask, what is your sort of comment to this development? What has happened here in Finland, because you're involved in many aspects?
Well, I think you're right that it's as close as we get to a Barnahus system, but it's clear that it's very focused on the investigative part of that full house, and maybe my own development, well, my own role here was from many years ago when I came in contact with a case where a small boy had been interviewed. It was suspected that his parents would have sexually abused him, and he was interviewed in a very suggestive and leading and terrible way. And he was removed from his parents for, I think, 2 years, until it was discovered that he was, in fact, not abused by them. They had not been abusing him. So he was actually traumatized very much by the system who wanted to help him rather than... I then became interested in child abuse interviews and started doing research on them, and at the time they looked really, really bad. They were not good in this country, as in many other countries. And I did actually an internship at the CRC in Geneva and heard a certain Bragi speak about the Barnahus system, and I thought, this is what we need. So there's a bridge to there as well. But after that, we've been working very much with many other colleagues with improving the child interviews. But of course, that's only one part of the system, and much remains to be done, which you will probably talk more about now.
Yeah.
Over to you.
Yeah, if we think in terms of the rooms that Olivia described, I think that we have a very well-furnished investigative room, sort of. We have been very heavily involved in academic research regarding the interviews, and the development of the units has also concentrated pretty much on the investigative side of things, which I think of course is good, but like you said, we need the other rooms as well. And here we come to the next picture, which I chose. And I chose it because I think it quite beautifully, I think, describe the kind of delicate equilibrium that exists between justice and welfare. And this sort of, well, I'm not sure if tension is the right word, but it is something that is inherent in Barnahus system. Because, like Olivia said, there are multiple functions and multiple goals. There's the goal of improving the justice side of things, the investigative interview, making the whole process child-friendly. But then again, there's also the child protection side, treatment, support that is given to a child. And if we think in terms of professions, also I think police and prosecutors often kind of look back. They try to find the facts and they try to find out whether a crime has happened or not, whereas the child protective services and even the treatment providers more often or concentrate on looking further to the future and ensuring safe development and the ability to thrive for the child. So I think the decision-making logics are also sometimes different, and this has been much written about. And if I now reflect to our situation in Finland, I think that we have many stones on the left side of the balance board, but what we want to do now in our Barnahus project is to sort of import more building blocks to the right side of the balance board. And what this means in practice is that we are going to train more professionals to trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, for example, as stated in Barnahus quality standards, yes. And we will also pilot and hopefully implement some other evidence-based intervention as well. For example, to situations where a parent has been physically abusive towards a child, but there's still motivation and capability for change. We have something like that in Finland, but we are also missing some, I think, important interventions that we need to at least pilot that are evidence-based also. And finally, I think that we we need to build stronger bridges to child protective services. We already have very good connections, strong connections to the police, and we train them, and I think the collaboration goes quite well, but we also need to focus on these other tasks. And final comment, when I chose this picture, at first I thought that I would choose a pendulum, which would sort of describe the back and forth swinging between justice and welfare, but then I decided that this is not what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a balance.
Great. I'm quite sure, Olivia, that the tension that Taina mentioned, or this equilibrium between law orientation and or investigation and then child protection and treatment is not only a Finnish matter, but probably something that is there in many other
absolutely
at the regional level.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see many different balancing acts going on in Europe, and it's not only this one, but it's also balancing other rooms. And I think that in any presentation on Barnahus, Bragi has to be mentioned at least twice. So I will quote him and say that it's really important to remember that Barnahus is never a fixed model. It's an evolving practice. So these debates that you are having and that are happening all over Europe, they are really, really important to get that balance right. And you know that Barnahus is a flexible and adaptable approach, and I wanted to find images that would reflect that kind of adaptability. And I came across lots of images of chameleons. And first, I kind of foolishly disregarded the relevance of chameleons to this presentation. But I am a little bit of a nerd, and I got really engrossed in the details of the chameleons. And the more study I did, the more I realized that there are some distinct similarities between chameleons and Barnahus. So I will turn a little bit to my notes now so that I get the facts right. But to begin with, chameleons are, just like Barnahus, unique, and they have very unique features. And yet they come in many different sizes, from very, very small to very, very big. And this is what we see in Europe. And there are, in fact, 171 species of chameleons. And just like there are so many different variations in Barnahus, and to date we haven't really been able to establish exactly how many variations there are in Barnahus, but I can tell you that only in Europe, 26 countries are working to adapt the model to their specific habitat. And just like chameleons, Barnahus navigate different contexts. And while chameleons adapt to the life in the forest, Barnahus navigate different socioeconomic, legal, and cultural contexts. And variations in Barnahus may occur in the way that they are organized, set up, in their target groups, and in the way that the agencies formally work together. And we believe that it is exactly, at least in the cases of Barnahus, I should add, that it is exactly this kind of adaptability and flexibility that has been key to the spread and success of Barnahus in Europe. But saying this, there are, of course, limitations to how many variations there can be. So for a chameleon to be a chameleon and a Barnahus to be a Barnahus, there have to be a few distinct characteristics that you don't find in other species and models. And that's actually the reason why we develop these Barnahus quality standards, because it was precisely to provide a common framework of elements that are key to the Barnahus, like these 4 rooms, and that are key to the role of Barnahus to prevent traumatization and to help fulfill children's rights to participation, protection, assistance, and child-friendly justice. And I'm not aware of a similar framework for chameleons, but I am sure that there must be some kind of classification system that helps you understand what is a chameleon and not an iguana, in the similar way as the Barnahus quality standards do for Barnahus. So, are all Barnahus in Europe fulfilling the standards? No. While newly born chameleons are miniature versions of adult chameleons and are independent from birth, we don't expect Barnahus to fulfill all the standards at birth. But just as chameleons, we expect Barnahus to grow and develop throughout life, because chameleons, unlike many other animals, actually grow throughout their lives. So we encourage growth and development through a step-by-step approach over time, just like the chameleon sheds its skin in bits and pieces and not like the snake all at once. I find that really interesting. But for many, and I'm trying hard to keep the balance here on Barnahus, believe me. So, for example, many Barnahus, they begin with a narrow target group, focusing only on child sexual abuse, and then they evolve towards a broader target group in line with the quality standard number 3. And in order to evolve in this way, Barnahus have to have this 360 arc of vision, just like chameleons have. They can look in different directions at the same time. And this is really to keep up with these kind of debates that Taina mentioned, to keep up with new and emerging developments, research, lessons learned from others, etc. And that's really where Promise comes in, because we believe that the more eyes and ears, the better, faster, and more relevant the developments will be. Sadly, chameleons are loners, but if you shed a little bit of ultraviolet light on them, they come together. It's true. They stick together, especially when they are exposed to ultraviolet light. And we do not want Barnahus to be loners. And that is why Promise sheds its ultraviolet light on all the Barnahus, so that there can be a vibrant exchange between Barnahus in Europe. And sticking together is really key to learning and understanding how we best balance. And when you find a solution, I'm sure there are many, many Barnahus who's out there who will want to learn from you.
That's fascinating. I was already interested in the Barnahus.
More about chameleons, I'm telling you.
I think there will be a lot of Googling on chameleons, and we probably all hope that all kinds of lizards can slowly turn into chameleons. And I suppose chameleons then also have each their own special difficulties. But if we now look at the lizard we have here in Finland, which is surprisingly chameleon-like, at least, what would you, Taina, say? What is the biggest difficulty of this particular chameleon-like lizard?
This is not perhaps a problem of the chameleon per se, but it is a problem if we think in terms of the child friendliness of the judicial processes. And I think this is such an important problem that I want to raise it up here. And I think, I hope I will find a way to tie it to chameleons also, but I'm not sure how to do it yet. This is a picture of an adolescent watching a sunrise. And there's a number, 730, in the middle. And the number is the number of mornings, days, and nights a child or adolescent has to wait currently for his or her case to progress from reporting to court decision. We're talking about child sexual abuse cases here with these statistics, but it's not actually any better if we think of other types of abuse. And we know from both clinical work and from the literature that this undue delay causes huge suffering, not only for the child and adolescent, but also for the whole family and everyone involved. And especially, I think adolescents often also voice their frustration and anger when they are faced with this issue. And not long ago, I was involved in a case where a 15-year-old said that she regrets ever coming forward with her story because the pretrial investigation had been going on for a year at that point. And she had also some difficulties getting help. So I think this is this cannot be accepted in any level, and it's also against Lanzarote Convention, for example. And I think one thing I would also like to mention is that there's also still this quite widespread misconception in the field that you have to wait before starting treatment. You have to wait until the pretrial investigation is over before supporting the child or adolescent. At least here in Finland, we still see that sometimes. But that's actually not true in almost any case. You can start giving support after the child has told what has happened, and you should not wait. But of course, the professional who provides the support needs to be very skilled and needs to understand not only child abuse, trauma, memory issues, and use evidence-based methods, but the therapist also needs to understand what sort of toll the whole judicial process is taking on the child and family. And as many of you probably know, it's often a very strong re-triggerer of symptoms once the trial is sort of on hand. So yeah, I think this is a huge problem. And if we think how it relates to Barnahus, of course we have the mission of enhancing the investigative phase so that it is as so that there are no delays. It is as happens as fast as possible. But also, I think we should raise awareness of this issue, and in terms of Barnahus quality standards, I think it's standard number 10 that would sort of describe this awareness raising and keeping up the discussion about this very important issue.
Well, I couldn't agree more. I think this is really the top problem in our country, and Taina and THL are actually hosting a big seminar the day after tomorrow on this particular topic, so you've really started working on this, which is excellent.
Yes, and I also think that it's very important to understand that this is a very complex problem. I would call it a wicked problem in a way, and it's one that no single profession, for example, can solve it alone. It is very much an issue that needs all our involvement.
Olivia, is this the issue of the length of these procedures? Are they similar in other countries, or?
Yeah, I think there may be a few countries who have a few less sunrises, but many that have more. We certainly see that across Europe, and you know, what you said made me think about many of the different things that children tell us about these processes. And of course, undue delay is one of the key ones. And I have a picture here, which I have borrowed from a conference report from an EC conference, European Commission on Child-Friendly Justice and Integrated Child Protection Systems from June. And I think this picture really illustrates well how we fail to adapt two children, and this child is sitting on a very high chair at the very high table, which obviously isn't adapted to his needs. And around this child, you see some quotes that come from children who have been through criminal investigations and judicial proceedings from across Europe. And I have taken them from a report from the Fundamental Rights Agency. And these quotes that you see here, they're also consistent with some of the research that has been done into children's experiences with the judicial process, but also their experiences in Barnahus. So what do we know about how children experience Barnahus, but also more broadly the system in itself? And like you said, Taina, we actually come across testimonies of children who regret that they reported the case in the first place due to the trauma that they have suffered and due to the fact that they have had to wait so long. And this is really not acceptable, because these children who have told about their abuse, they have had to overcome substantial barriers in the first place to even talk to someone about the abuse. So as you will see from the quotes up here in red, children tell us that delay prevents them from going back to their normal lives and start to recover from the traumatic events that they have gone through. But children also often tell us that they experience that adults actually don't listen to them properly, and that trust and being heard and not being heard really prevents them from disclosing. So they need to feel that trust, and they need to see our ears open. And they also tell us that they want caring staff when they disclose their abuse. So it's not just about being given an opportunity to be heard, but also to feel that you are cared for and someone who's worth listening to. Children also tell us that they want to share their experiences in a private and safe environment, and that they should not have to meet the accused. As you will see, some of these quotes relate to that. And they tell us that they prefer to tell their stories once or very few times, preferably to the same person, and with others listening in. If they do have to appear in court, they recommend that it is a closed session and that media and others apart from the parties to the case are not present. And another thing that they say is that in court they would like to be treated with kindness and respect. We hear testimonies of small children who have had to stand up for hours, and when they are too tired and start to cry, the judge have yelled to them that they're not behaving properly. That's unacceptable. And some children say that, you know, it would just be nice if the judge had said hello to me before the session started, so I knew that he saw me and wanted to listen. Another thing that children tell us from across Europe is that it's really important for them to be given relevant information about what will happen, about why they're going to Barnahus or another place, who will be interviewing them, who will listen into their interview, and how their interview or the recording of their interview will be used, and in which context. So not only in court, if others are listening to this, if there's a child protection who is listening in, how will they actually use the information? So to summarize, feeling involved, in control and safe, and having adequate information makes it easier for children to speak about the violence that they have experienced, but also makes them less traumatized by the events. And this also relates to undue delay. If you at least feel that you're not left in a void, but you know that things are happening and what is happening, then you can feel a little bit better about waiting for your case to be brought up.
Yeah, absolutely. Taina, do you want to comment these quotes by these children?
Maybe not the quotes, but I echo your last sentence about like information sharing, how important it is, and it sort of helps you to mitigate some of the like ill effects of the delay. That you know what is going to happen next, and you are prepared, maybe also to wait. So yeah.
And I think also these quotes and what you were just saying, Olivia, it's, I think, important for us to know that already within Europe, the legal systems and what is required of children when interviewed in the legal context is so very different. I think from a Nordic perspective, it's incredible that children will have to go to court by themselves because it's been for a long time so that they are heard in the pre-trial investigation. So there are things that are working very well in some countries and that... So this like coping what works in different countries certainly makes a lot of sense. And on that point, what works... I asked you to give some examples of what is most problematic here in Finland, but would you like to share with us something positive then?
Yes, maybe a couple of words about new developments. The work in Barnahus does not only happen within a Barnahus, it also happens between Barnahus and other authorities or institutions or collaborators. And this is a picture of my dear colleagues. They are social workers, they are psychologists, and they work in one of the specialized units, these Barnahus type units, and they work here in Helsinki. Many of you who are here today actually visited the unit yesterday. And about 2 years ago, due to increased number of abuse cases, partly, a new system was developed, and these lovely ladies were sent, or they were actually asked to work within the police. And they did it in a city of Espoo, which is the second largest city here in Finland, and they worked there part-time for over a year. And they developed new ways of working, new kinds of multi-professional collaboration, new types of sort of risk assessment and service referral, and also brought in their expertise in child sexual and physical abuse or all types of abuse, forensic psychology, trauma-related issues, investigative interviews, and so forth. And they sort of strengthened the bond between the Barnahus type unit and the police. But in this case, they also went in there to work at the grassroots level. And all the parties have been very, very happy with this type of work. I don't think it's only because they got more resources, the police. I think they were genuinely happy. And one of the key reasons is that it was not only coordinating or cooperating, but really collaborating towards the same goal, which is the best interest of the child. And I guess 3 points I'd like to make with this picture. Building new types of working and really getting to know each other. When you work in a multi-professional setting, it takes time. It can take years. So I think we have to be merciful to ourselves that it will take time. And the practices are ever evolving. I hear, echo your chameleon picture. They are ever evolving. Also, I think that we need both sort of top-down planning and bottom-up learning. I think we need guidelines, we need instructions, we need quality standards, we need evidence-based methods. I think it's very important. But we also need to leave room for some flexibility and like grassroots developments. And I actually think that the quality standards also exemplify this idea, at least in my mind. Yeah. And finally, my final point is that they look really happy. And it's not only, I forgot to say that this is from a situation where they were actually awarded by the police. They were given a medal of some sort, I think. And they're not happy only because they got an award. I know them. They often look like that. And I know that, they are very passionate about their work and ambitious. But also, I think they exemplify a sort of positive and hopeful outlook that you really need to have when you work in the face of violence, like Päivi Sillanauke said in her opening words. And I think in order to keep going, you really need to have this sort of hopeful outlook. Otherwise, you can't go on. And remember all the things that are actually improving. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I think we'll continue on the notion of happy-looking people. Olivia, who are these happy-looking people?
Yeah, we like happy people, and as you probably can see, there's a lot of ultraviolet light in this picture and the one previous as well, because these are people who have played such an important role in building the Promise Network. And I can see a few scared faces here looking to see if they are on this image and if they look good. You all look good, and a lot of you are here in this room together. This is one of the first Promise meetings that we had in Iceland. And, you know, when we started coming together in Promise, there were a handful of Barnahus in Europe, and now, actually, as I said before, 26 countries only in Europe are working individually and together as a group to establish Barnahus and to work progressively to achieve the Barnahus quality standards. And yesterday, we together, many of you were there, launched the Promise Barnahus Network. And we also had the amazing and wonderful news that the European Commission will fund the third phase of the Promise project, which means that we can continue to shed ultraviolet light over Barnahus in Europe. And at CBSS, where I work, we're really so proud to host the network, which is a celebration of the generosity of these people and so many others who, in a similar way, collaborate and work together to exchange, to learn, to share about how we can take forward the model. We are also planning, in the context of the network and Promise 3, to have university-based trainings, continued exchange, study visits, dialogue, new exciting things going on child participation and how we can involve children. We will be consulting with children on what the Barnahus quality standards actually mean for them in practice. So there will be lots of exciting ways to engage and to learn from each other. And in the longer term, we're also hoping that we can put together an accreditation system for Barnahus based on the standards so that people have a good incentive to kind of continue to work progressively against the standards. So currently the network contains 15 founding members, but the Promise project involves so many more. And I want to end this picture by saying that the Promise network is exactly as welcoming as this image implies, we want people to engage with us, and we welcome all stakeholders to become members of the networks, or in other ways engage with us.
Do you want to comment, Taina, on this? Or?
Cannot wait to collaborate more.
Exactly. You see, these people are also part of it all.
Yeah.
Soon
And
they'll
we will
start
learn
dancing.
all about the balancing act from you, as you get it right.
Taina, do you have any final remarks, or should we ask Olivia to give some thoughts about the way forward?
Please, Olivia.
Yeah. So the name of this session was Ways Forward. So to summarize what we have been talking about while looking at this beautiful image of houses sticking together in different shapes, colors, and sizes. I would just like to reiterate that in order to balance the 4 rooms that we were talking about, we need to see Barnahus as an evolving practice, and constantly kind of shine a bright light on the way that we work and the way that we serve children. And in the context of the Promise project and the development of the standards, there was a strong agreement, because we had a huge consultation of experts and people who work in Barnahus on the standards. And there was an agreement that the 4 rooms should be balanced. And the standards actually cover all the 4 rooms together with a few other items. And what we already learned is that in order to balance the 4 rooms, it's really important to build trust and to build mutual understanding and ownership across professions. And even though the Barnahus itself is a great place to achieve this, it just doesn't happen. You have to put commitment and work into making it happen. And it's really important to invest in concrete measures that help you work on equal terms, to give everyone a voice, and that encourages exchange of information. And going forward, we could perhaps learn from some of the Barnahus where this works really well, to see how they have achieved that balance and how they're making sure that all aspects come to the fore on equal basis. And I think to end, the absolute key, I believe, in ensuring that Barnahus continues to evolve and that we get the balance right, is to hear the voices of children. We really have to focus on becoming even better at listening to children. And this will be a key priority for Promise. And we have already started by developing a tool which guides you, but also includes a few template questionnaires that you can use to hear children's voices about their experiences in Barnahus. And they can be found on the website, and I think the last slide actually has the website. So I think that our European approach, coming together like this, having these discussions, that is really going to continue to help us to evolve and to develop collaboration, balance, and Barnahus.